Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. Friends, today I want to talk to you about dating in Judaism. And to sum it up in a few words, friends, it does not exist. And when I say it does not exist, I mean what is considered social dating nowadays. In other words, the notion of dating just to date without the immediate intent of marriage. Now, some in an attempt to justify social dating from a religious perspective may say that the person I'm currently dating might end up being my future spouse, even though I'm not actively looking. But friends, that's exactly the type of dating we're speaking about and against in this video. And the biggest trap that most men and women fall into today, mainly because 99 times out of 100, the person will not end up becoming your spouse. And that's just one more heartbreak and possibly one more person you will sleep with till you finally find Mr. or Mrs. Right. Not to mention that every bed partner you have outside of marriage decreases your chances of ever getting married in the first place. And virtually all studies show that if you ever do get married, premarital sex will most likely affect your future happiness with your future spouse. Which is why the concept we know today as dating never existed in the Torah world, nor should it have. Why? Because it's senseless and irrational, my friends. No, friends, the only Torah standard to dating that only exists within the concept of the arranged marriage. Now, I know many people cringe when they hear that term, so let me try to clear up any misconceptions of what an arranged marriage is or is not. Friends, in Judaism, we call this a shidduch. And the way this occurs is that when a Jewish male or female is ready to get married, his or her parent goes to the shadchan, in English, a matchmaker, who will then consult rabbis and other kosher means to find individuals for that person to meet and then wait to see if a match is made. And also, you must know that the idea of an independent matchmaker is a fairly new invention because traditionally the person's parents would seek out a potential spouse for their child to meet and possibly marry. And during these meetings, sometimes called dates, the couples talk about their interests and their long-term goals to determine if they're compatible. If one of the two do not feel that the person would make an adequate spouse, they go on other dates till finally a match is made. Now, I know that many of you heard of such marriages where the two didn't meet to the day of their wedding. However, this is actually against halacha and is obviously not the correct way to marry your children off. Even the Rambam mentions how we should not do this to our children, because honestly, how could you expect to match your child with someone he or she may find completely repulsive, and not just from a physical perspective, but even from an intellectual one? And friends, the theory behind this form of dating is because, in all truth, our parents most likely know more about picking our potential spouses than we do. And if for some reason they don't, fine, then go through another person, a relative, friend, rabbi, etc. Now, in Judaism, the actual dating lasts about 1 to 2 months after the correct match is made, and the couple is typically married about a month after that. Now, you're probably thinking, that sounds a bit fast. Why don't they just wait a year or two before taking that big step? Why? Well, friends, because honestly, what do you think people who date months or years at a time eventually end up doing with their partners? That's right, they have sex, my friends. And when that happens, it just ends up decreasing the likelihood that the marriage will ever take place, or even possibly lead to the couple just moving in with each other and ultimately just end up making their spouse their own personal prostitute. And worse, because at least the prostitute gets paid. Now, friends, I just explained the ideal, and the question is, how does this translate to us in the real world? In other words, what I just explained in the manner that I explained it only really applies to someone who was raised in a religious household with a religious outlook for their whole life. And many of us are balei tshuva, gerim, so how does this apply to us with our emotional and physical baggage? And please note that all this that I've said so far only applies if the other spouse is religious also. So don't take the plunge on a silly notion that I'll make the person religious later, because it won't work. Now, friends, what I'm stating right now is only my opinion. In other words, it demands for you to validate it logically first. So I would recommend religious individuals who may have become religious later in life to do exactly as someone who was raised religious with regards to finding a spouse, with the addition of putting their spouse on birth control for at least a year and a half after the chuppah. Because honestly, what we're trying to prevent is premarital sex, divorce, and children with unintact homes. So in other words, premarital sex is worse than divorce without children, and divorce with children is worse than them all. And by compromising our children, friends, we start the whole vicious cycle all over again, which is exactly what we see with children today. Because nowadays, what typically happens is that kids start dating at the age of 13 and are having sex typically at 14 and sometimes even earlier. So what you end up having is children that go from spouse to spouse till around the age of 20, when they're completely jaded with the opposite sex. And because of this boredom, begin to have sex on demand or even start experimenting with the same sex. And another thing that has really encouraged the disaster we have in the dating world today is the new definition of what we call love. In other words, love nowadays is defined as merely a feeling instead of what it truly is, and that's an intellectual decision to committingly do something good for someone else. Today, what we call love is really just an extreme attraction, which is a good thing to have with the person you marry, but it's by no means what makes the marriage work. In other words, love is an action on the same basis that in the Torah we're commanded to love God. And I don't have to tell you, friends, on how we really have to make this clear to our children from an early age. And honestly, friends, sometimes I just want to smack parents upside the head for allowing their teenage children to date or have a boyfriend or girlfriend. Because honestly, what do you think children who date do when their parents are not around? Friends, wake up. It's no secret that if you have a child who has a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you could already assume that they're having sex and everything above and beneath that, which has always been a reason for even atheists to consider being religious or adopting a religious lifestyle for the sake of their children. And I'm sorry to say that once you have a child that has been sexually active, they will never view sex the same way again. In other words, you have almost condemned their life to a life of misery, all under the guise of the trust society tells we owe our children. And why do I say almost? Because if this is the case, the situation is not completely helpless, because people have been known to recover from this, but it's not easy. And apart from filtering your child's friends, another way to ensure that your children stays away from a lot of the nonsense that's poisoning their minds today is by monitoring what they watch on TV and what sites they go to online. This is really, my friends, a no-brainer. So again, friends, please do not let your children date or let them hang out with the opposite sex. If you can't afford a religious school that separates the sexes, homeschool them. And again, I feel silly even having to state this, because it's ultimately you who decides the future for your children. And friends, if your excuse for not having a parent stay home to spend the necessary time to get this done in your child's life, if you're saying that I can't do it because I can't afford it, then sell your house and move into an apartment. Or sell your apartment and move into a studio, or even move to the country and get it done. And friends, don't let society tell you how to raise your children. And even if that society is made up of mostly Jews, because many think because I'm Jewish, I condone the traditional Jewish family with the hysterical masculine mother and the oblivious father. In other words, from a Torah perspective, most Jews do not know how to raise their children. And just look at the vast majority of Jews today for proof. In other words, look at the inescapable fact that the majority of Jews today are religiously and ethically dysfunctional. In other words, the biblical standard is our model, and let no one tell you different. And friends, if you're hearing me today and you're sick and tired at the hand you have been dealt in life by perhaps not being raised in a religious household with religious instructions for life, or perhaps you feel that it may be too late for you because of the decisions you've already made, well, friends, it may not be too late for your children or your grandchildren. So today you can decide to embrace our God's holy instructions for living. You can decide to embrace Torah and not only change your life, but also change your line. For more information on converting to Judaism, please visit TorahJudaism.org. And for more information on everything Jewish, please visit bejewish.org. Thank you.